In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate the alternating cast-on, sometimes called the Italian cast-on. It's a method of casting on in knit one, purl one pattern that looks very similar to the tubular cast-on, but is structurally different and simpler to work. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. The alternating cast-on is a method of casting on in knit one, purl one ribbing that doesn't create an edge, but instead allows the columns of knits and purls to just roll around from one side of the fabric to the other. Now you may think, well, this looks an awful lot like a tubular cast-on, and it does look a lot like a tubular cast-on. This here is a tubular cast-on, and the difference between them is in the process for creating it. There is a slight structural difference. A tubular cast-on actually does create a tube of double knitting stockinette at the base. So you are creating a tube of knitting that you then transition into knit one, purl one. And there are a number of setup rows involved in doing that, and it can be difficult to work in the round, can create some problems. So the alternating cast-on is thinner at the base because it doesn't have this tube of knitting, and it's simpler to work in the round, but it's just as simple to work flat as well. You're going to work your cast-on using a needle that's 1 or 2 sizes smaller than the needle that you plan to use for the rest of the ribbing. So I intend to use a size 5 needle, US size 5 needle, which is a 3.75 millimeter needle. So I'm going to cast on using a US 3, which is a 3.25 millimeter needle. So I'm going to show you how to cast on if you're working flat first, and then I'll show you the slight differences for casting on to work in the round. So we don't start with a slip knot. Instead, we take the yarn tail. We hold our index finger and thumb together like this, and the tail comes over the front of the thumb. And so we want as much tail as we need for this cast on, about half as much as you need for a long tail cast on. And then you're going to grasp both strands in your palm like this. So now you've created this hole here that's bound by the yarn and your fingers. We're going to cast on using just a simple twist for the first stitch. If your second stitch is going to be a purl, so if you're working the first stitch as a knit or as a selvage stitch, and your second stitch is going to be a purl, you take your needle down in this hole, point it toward yourself, and then have it point to the left. This creates a left twist. If your second stitch is going to be a knit stitch, and your first stitch is going to be counted as a purl or a selvage, then you want to come with your needle pointed to the right and then twist it around that way. So I'm going to assume my second stitch is a purl because my first is a knit. So I'm going to create the left twist, and now I'm going to cast on for a purl. We have 2 strands, and this is called the alternating cast on because we alternate whether the strand from the index finger ends up on the needle or the thumb yarn ends up on the needle. So we're alternating between those two. So to do a purl, we're going to take our working needle under both strands and then over the thumb yarn that's closest to us. And as we come around, we're going to see on the needle this little bump come down, and it kind of slides out, kind of clicks into place. So we've got a knit and a purl on the needle. Now we're going to do a knit stitch. We're going to come under just the first strand, and then we're going to grab this back strand by coming over it and pulling it through. And now that back strand is on the needle. So now we've done a knit. So now we're going to do a purl, and just like when you actually purl a stitch, you come from behind. We're coming behind and we're going under both strands and then over the strand in front. And as we come around, that cinches and clicks into place. Now we're going to do a knit, and just like with a regular knit stitch, we come from the front and grab the yarn back that's in the back and bring it to the front. So now we can keep alternating. So I've just finished a knit, so I'm going to do a purl. I'm going to do them quickly now. So I've got a purl and it looks like a purl bump. You can see this strand is in front of that stitch and it looks like a purl bump. So I'm going to do my knit and now I do my purl, come under both strands in order to grab that one. And as I bring it around, it kind of locks into place down in front. So you may be wondering why when we're doing a knit, we come under only one strand, but when we're like this, but when we're doing a purl, we're coming under both strands and then catching that front one. And the reason has to do with stitch mount. So when we come under here, this is very much like a regular knit stitch. You see how when I pull it, it's angled to the left on the needle. So the stitch mount causes that to angle to the left. When I do a purl, I want the same thing. So when I come like this, you see how it's angled to the left as I create it? That gives me the appropriate stitch mount. If I were to come under only the back strand and then come over the top, it would be angled to the right, and that's not what we want. So this is not attached at all, it's not secure. So if you need to count your stitches, you need to keep tension on the yarn, pinch them together while you count your stitches. So in order to finish, whether the last stitch is meant to be a knit or a purl, it doesn't matter when we're knitting flat. We're going to secure all of this and end with a regular long tail cast on stitch. So we're coming through the thumb loop, the twisted loop, grabbing the yarn from behind and pulling it through, and that locks everything in. So regardless of whether you have an odd number or an even number, that's how you're going to finish when you are working flat. Okay, so when you have finished your cast on row and you're working flat, you need to know, did you end with a purl or a knit? I have an even number of stitches. I started with a knit one and I ended, my long tail cast on counts as a purl. So when I turn the work, this will be a knit because the backside of a purl is a knit. I bring in my larger needle and I begin working in pattern. So this first one is a knit and then it's a purl. If I am unsure about whether I'm supposed to knit or purl, I can look at the stitches. They look distinctly different. The ones that look like a vertical strand that are smooth at the base are the knits. The ones that have that horizontal strand going across the base look like purl stitches, so those are purled. So you can read the stitches and know how to work them. If you put your knitting down and you lose track of where you were. When you cast on in the round, you're going to need an even number of stitches and there aren't going to be any selvage stitches. So when you begin your cast on, you're going to create the left twist, which is again done by going down into the hole, pointing toward yourself, and then to the left. And now you've created a left twist. So this counts as your first knit stitch. So you're going to purl, and then you're going to knit, you're going to purl. The last two stitches are going to be a knit, and then you need to finish. You're not going to finish with a long tail cast on like you did before. Instead, you're going to finish with just a regular backwards loop, and we're going to do that backwards loop with the yarn that's over the index finger. You're going to point at yourself and come through that loop from behind like this. And then put that one on the needle, and that will lock everything in place. So that's going to serve as your purl stitch. Then you can join in the round and you can be with your larger needle and work in knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one all the way across. Anytime you cast on a bunch of stitches onto a long circular needle, your instructions will tell you to join in the round, being careful not to twist. And what they're looking for is that your cast on edge is not twisting around your needle. And that's going to be a problem with this cast on, just like it is with any other cast on. Before you decide to join in the round, you want to try to line everything up underneath. How can you tell, though, which direction these things are twisting around? So I'm going to show you. So if we look at these stitches, we see the long strand, the long smooth strand is the knit, and the one with the bump under it is the purl. So we're just going to come until we get to a place where we think something is not quite right, like right here. So if I'm not sure which way this is twisting around and I go this way, that's not improving anything. If I come back this direction, then I can see, oh, I've got my regular knit that's smooth like it's supposed to be. Oh, now I've got my purl and my knit. And I can move along until I get to another place along the cast on edge that looks wrong, and I can kind of adjust and see, well, does it help if I go in this direction, or does it help if I go in the other direction? So you can kind of see how to get things straightened out before you join in the round. And inevitably things are going to probably twist around while you're working in the round, but you should be able to correct things on the needle as you are knitting, and then check again at the end of the round, just like you would in any situation, in order to confirm that nothing is twisted around the needle. This swatch was worked in the round using the alternating cast on. And I have the yarn tail here. It's a pretty smooth join. There's not much of a jog, but to weave in the yarn tail, thread the yarn onto a yarn needle, and then what I would do is just poke the needle through the center of that first knit stitch of the round. To join the edge like that, and then weave in the yarn tail. Another 2-strand cast on that alternates placing loops from the thumb yarn on the needle with loops from the index finger yarn is the alternating long tail cast on, which I demonstrated in this video over here. The bind off method that matches the alternating cast on is the grafted bind off, which I demonstrated over here. If you have any comments or questions about today's video, or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.